It is kind of a double-edged sword, I think, because on the one hand, you do have this aspect of the internet where you get this group of angry men telling women to shut up or they're going to rape them. But on the other hand, I think it's given women permission to speak in a way that we've never had before, or I suppose a better way of putting it would be to say it's taken away the need for permission. You can just start a blog, you can just start a Twitter account, and you can start writing about what you think. And I'd always wanted to write. But in my head, I always had this idea that there would be a guy in a suit who I would have to submit my work to.
Yeah.
And he would not like my work. And so I just didn't really want to go down that route. And I think that's the way it is for a lot of women, that we sort of feel nervous about this man who has to give us permission, this sort of monolithic man. And I think the internet's been amazing for feminism overall. It's really given women a really powerful voice.
The problem of online violence has become a pandemic, and women and girls are more often the victims. Our research suggests that 73% of women on the net have already experienced some form of online violence.
Quantum superstate feminism can be described as a phenomenon observed when third-wave feminist activism exists as both victim and aggressor when eliciting or exploiting preferential treatment from big government. The term was coined by journalist and self-styled provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos to describe a modern strand of feminism often championed or empowered by the state, whose figureheads are at once aggressor and victim, trolling, provoking and ridiculing their ideological opponents, while at the same time crying foul when their own provocative language is returned in kind. Yiannopoulos cited the pretext behind the United Nations call for urgent action to combat cyber violence against women and girls as one of the finest examples of this phenomenon. In September 2015, the United Nations Broadband Commission called for effective legal and social controls of online behaviours with rigorous oversight and enforcement so that the internet can become a safe, respectful and empowering space for women and girls, and by extension for boys and men. The call was made during an event at the United Nations headquarters in New York, hosted by the Broadband Commission's Working Group on Gender, which launched a report described as a wake-up call to governments and industry, which claimed that worldwide almost 3/4 of women online have been exposed to some form of cyber violence. The headline findings and recommendations were quickly repeated across various high-profile media, including the New York Times, Time magazine and the BBC. But, as is often the case in manifestations of quantum superstate feminism, the proposed narrative quickly collapsed when subjected to basic scrutiny. One independent blogger took the time to review all 120 footnotes in the 70-page UN document and found errors in 77 of them, including blank citations, broken links, and sources that didn't exist. And remarkably, when one college professor pursued a citation for the research behind the UN's headline claim, it was revealed that it was based on the user data of one US-based helpline and involved a sample size of 356 people. Here's Christina Hoff-Summers to expand on her discovery.
The UN report insists the internet is an unsafe place for women. Now, there is a lot of viciousness on the web, including threats of violence. But is it as pervasive as the UN report suggests? And are women actually at greater risk than men? Well, let's start with the report's showcase statistic that 73% of women have experienced or been exposed to online violence. Where is the research to back it up? The claim is footnoted, but the footnote takes you to another UN publication that says nothing about online violence. Well, after a few calls and an email, the lead author of the UN report, Anita, had her office send me the source. And it turned out to be the website of a small volunteer group called Halt Abuse that helps people cope with online threats and stalking. The group reported that of the 349 people who had sought their help in 2010, 73% were women, 27% men. The women's percentage is lower in more recent years. For some reason, she picked 2010. Well, that, believe it or not, is the UN source for the disturbing 73% claim that women on the internet are victims of abuse. Now imagine if I claimed that because 73% of those who watch The Factual Feminist are women, therefore 73% of the world's women watch my videos. I mean, I wish that were true, but the rules of logic intervene.
In his article, the UN wants to censor the entire internet to save feminists' feelings. Yiannopoulos also observed that the two highest profile feminists invited to speak at the event have intriguing backstories and are considered by many to be professional wind-up merchants who have prospered in an environment where they can say what they like about men, no matter how preposterous or offensive, and then generate column inches, popularity and profit by claiming to experience brutal online harassment simply for speaking their truth. Research data indicates that severe online harassment is experienced by both sexes in relatively equal numbers. Meanwhile, Yiannopoulos argues that quantum superstate feminism reframes the concept of violence to include disobliging tweets and basic criticism, which in turn encourages unelected bureaucrats to call for rigorous enforcement and oversight of the internet and the need to clamp down on basic free speech provisions to insulate these delicate first world feminist wallflowers from the consequences of their own purposefully provocative statements. Anita Sarkeesian, who was invited to speak at the UN, is cited as a prime example. Sarkeesian is a controversial feminist media critic who rose to prominence in 2012 when she raised $160,000 via a Kickstarter campaign for a video project called Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, and reported receiving a significant volume of online abuse as a consequence, including rape threats, doxing, and misogynistic slurs. She has since become a high-profile advocate for online regulation and is viewed by some as a champion for women's rights in cyberspace, while others have questioned her methods and claims and argue that much of the behaviour that this outspoken professional critic frames as abuse is simply valid criticism of an outspoken professional critic's often outlandish claims. Here's a clip of her testimony to the United Nations, where she shares her opinion of what should be considered within the definition of egregious online harassment.
Anita, with your work through feminist frequency, how do you interpret a multi-level approach to working on these issues?
Yeah, so Feminist Frequency is a nonprofit that I run where we look at the way women are represented in the media. And by doing this work, I have been the target for 3 years nonstop of egregious online harassment in all levels. I think it's important to recognize that harassment is, as someone had mentioned, it's not just what is legal and illegal, right? Harassment is threats of violence, but it's also the day-to-day grind of you're a liar, you suck, you know, making all of these hate videos to attack us on a regular basis, and the mobs that come from those hate videos, etc. And so, you know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about online harassment and what we can do about it. I think that the online social media sites and the places in which we are engaging on these large platforms really need to step up and change the way that their systems operate. So it's not enough that they simply put Band-Aids on the problem areas, that they need to completely reimagine what their systems look like in order to build sites that actively deter online harassment, that make it harder to do this. We're not going to go and convince every single person who does horrible things online to stop doing those things, but we can make systems that actively deter that kind of behavior, which would make a huge impact on the lives of me and so many other people who are being harassed online.
I'll include a link below to an excellent assessment of this testimony, which outlines a commonly held view amongst many of Sarkeesian's YouTube peers that what she describes as hate videos might more reasonably be viewed as fair criticism and reply and scrutiny of the quality of Sarkeesian's own critical output. Here's a little clip.
Without an objective standard, Level 3 should not be considered harassment. And that brings us to the big one, Level 4. Hate videos. The word hate gets thrown around a lot these days, as does the word attack. So if we wanted to find a handful of examples of these so-called hate videos, we're going to need a bit more information. According to Quinn, the people making these hate videos are on YouTube, they make their living producing these videos, and they are not anonymous. So this time we're not talking about anonymous trolls on 4chan. We are talking about a very small number of individuals with hundreds of thousands of subscribers gaining tens of millions of views. Right off the bat, we can reasonably deduce that these people are not issuing any level 1 threats. If they did, not only would their careers be over, they would have effectively convicted themselves. So what could these individuals on YouTube possibly be saying that qualifies as abuse? Well, keeping in mind that Anita Sarkeesian has content on YouTube herself, let's have a look at a few examples of monetized videos that have something negative to say either about her or her content.
Video games do actually cause sexism. No, of course not. That's how a scientist would approach the problem. You know, the ones who found there was no link between playing games and sexism.
Men in particular tend to view women as less intelligent.
Okay, this particular picture as well from Grand Theft Auto, that's actually his sister. I used to treat my sister like that, and she used to treat me like that. That picture is taken way out of context. She hasn't even researched what's going on between those two characters. She's just assumed there's a man there pointing his finger up to a girl. Oh my god, that's sexist. He's treating her badly.
Feminist Frequency, as a non-profit organization, does nothing but make videos. Her expenses for 2014 were $64,000. Her assets at the end of the year were $384,000. Do you know how many videos Feminist Frequency released in 2014, the year that these figures are from? The answer honestly shocked even me. 4! One of them is just video of her speaking at an awards ceremony.
I hate using that term, victim card. I don't like using it. I don't like saying professional victim. It's something that I don't say very often, but she is the very definition of that.
A little closer to home, another example of the type of behaviour that supports the manifestation of the quantum superstate feminism phenomenon in this reality can be drawn from the example of how Labour MP Jess Phillips reacted to negative media coverage and public criticism arising from her own perceived chauvinism. In 2015, whilst considering an application to hold a parliamentary debate on issues particularly affecting men, Phillips was caught on camera, openly laughing and unable to hide her contempt at the notion, flippantly proposing that every day is International Men's Day and that she would only allow such a discussion when at least 50% of MPs were female. Significantly, Phillips, who defines herself as first and foremost an advocate for women's rights, had only recently entered Parliament, having previously been employed as the business development manager for a women-only organisation who provide state-funded assistance to female victims of domestic and sexual violence. It could be argued that her intervention involved something of a conflict of interest, given that one of the key inequalities highlighted by the debate, which was approved despite her protests, was the stark imbalance in state support for male victims. The Daily Telegraph's coverage of this outburst led to Phillips receiving a not insignificant amount of criticism from the general public, and the observation that had the genders been reversed, the MP would probably be facing calls to resign. However, within 24 hours, Phillips managed to dramatically spin the story on its head by claiming that she was being subjected to a huge torrent of abuse, death and rape threats on Twitter from the very caucus who had lobbied Parliament for the debate, namely advocates of men's rights. Anyone following her Twitter feed will have mostly witnessed polite, constructive and contextualised criticism. However, when one tweeter foolishly asked her for evidence to support her claims about receiving abusive tweets, Phillips existed as both victim and aggressor in the same moment by calling him a complete prick and tweeting him a screenshot of 2 offensive comments from an obscure message board that one of her aides had managed to uncover. Within months, she was helping to front a campaign purporting to want to reclaim the internet internet on behalf of women who were being drowned out by faceless avatars. She stressed that the campaign wasn't about making laws to stifle free speech, but a listening project to establish how best to limit the kind of behaviour that would be totally unacceptable offline. Noticeably, in her Huffington Post article marking the launch of the campaign, she focused on her particular disdain for a phenomenon described as dogpiling, stating that it's not the viciousness of attacks I get on the internet that bothers me. People talking about raping me isn't fun, but has become somewhat par for the course. What is a real pain is the thousands of tweets or notifications that join in. I think my record is 700 people blocked in one night. Like Sarkeesian a few months earlier, Phillips appeared to be pointing to a plea for protection from the sort of non-criminal but presumably critical or negative communication that outspoken public figures can receive in significant quantity. Remarkably, within days, almost every national newspaper were carrying headlines claiming that Phillips had been a victim of a dogpiling incident on Twitter, where she had been sent anywhere between 600 and 5,000 rape threats in one day. Once again, there is no evidence in the public domain that the MP received a single credible rape threat, and in reality, independent audits have shown that she was trolled by less than 100 people after she reacted to criticism from a high-profile British YouTuber. Once again, she existed as both victim and aggressor when she claimed she would be contacting the police and Twitter and was considering taking legal action.
I will speak to the police. I don't need to contact the police anymore because the police, my local police officers, watch what happens on Twitter and they get in touch with me. But I certainly will be contacting Twitter about some of the ringleaders of this dogpiling. I will also, I think that actually I've got to the stage now where I feel that legal action, be it civil or criminal, in some way is the way to attack these people.
Ultimately, she didn't contact the police, did not take legal action, and Twitter advised her that after a thorough investigation, they had concluded that none of their community guidelines had been broken. Interestingly, Phillips is a strong supporter of the Home Office's framework, which classifies and records all crimes relating to domestic and sexual abuse as violence against women and girls, even when the victim is male. This framework follows the United Nations Convention perspective on domestic and sexual violence, which defines them as gendered crimes that are cause and consequence of women's broader inequality within society. This month, the UK's Crown Prosecution Service published their current strategy for crimes classified as violence against women and girls, which noticeably promotes the possibility that women are 27 times more likely to be abused online than men, and the only evidence they provide to support this notion is the 2015 UN report finding that, of course, has been thoroughly debunked.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.